My sister walked into the apartment I managed, tossing a rent increase letter onto my kitchen table, tripling the price from $2, $350 to $700. My parents called it fair, but they didn't know that beneath my fingernails was ink from the signature on documents my grandmother had left me. The entire building was mine, and I'd been preparing for this moment in silence for 3 years. Olivia Taylor stood frozen at her kitchen window, watching raindrops trace jagged paths down the glass. Seattle winters had always felt like this gray and relentless. But today, the weather perfectly mirrored the storm brewing inside her apartment. The rent increase letter lay on her kitchen table, its white envelope stark against the worn wood surface. Her fingertips traced the edge of the paper, feeling the indent where the expensive fountain pen had pressed hard enough to leave marks. She was 34, not where she'd expected to be by now. Community college, a property management certificate, a one-bedroom apartment in the building she managed. Yet somehow, despite the modest resume, she'd found purpose in keeping Willow Heights running smoothly, making sure elderly residents had working heaters in winter, and young families could raise their children in a safe environment. The distinctive click of designer heels announced her sister's arrival before Victoria Taylor's sharp knock. Olivia watched through the window as Victoria strode past Mrs. Martinez and her granddaughter, without acknowledgement, her tailored suit as crisp as her ambition. A Yale Law partnership at 39 versus community college at 34. A brownstone in the nice part of town versus an apartment in the building she managed. The comparison had never stung until today. "Olivia," Victoria said, pushing the door open without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk." Victoria placed a manila envelope on the kitchen table with practiced precision, the kind she probably used in courtrooms. Her pearl necklace caught the light, the one Grandma Eleanor had given her for law school graduation. "The family had a meeting last weekend about Willow Heights." Olivia set down her coffee mug, noticing how her sister said "the family," as if she wasn't part of it. "What meeting? I wasn't invited." "It was an investors' discussion." Victoria adjusted her pearls. "Mom, Dad, myself, and Uncle Richard. We've been reviewing the building's financials." "The building's financials are fine," Olivia replied, heat rising to her face. "We're at 95% occupancy. Maintenance is up to date." Victoria waved her manicured hand dismissively. "The market's hot, Olivia. Properties in this neighborhood are selling for 3 times what they were worth 5 years ago. We're hemorrhaging opportunity cost." Olivia stared at her sister. "Hemorrhaging opportunity cost. These are people's homes, Victoria." "It's a business asset." Victoria tapped the envelope. "Which brings me to why I'm here. Effective next month, we're implementing new rental rates to align with market standards." With steady hands but racing mind, Olivia opened the envelope. The letter inside was printed on Victoria's law firm letterhead. Her eyes scanned down to the numbers, and she had to read them twice. $7,100. Her voice came out strangled. "My rent is going from $2 to $350 to $7,100. Your below-market rate was a courtesy extended by Grandma Eleanor." Victoria's tone was clinical detached. "But we can't run a business on sentiment. Every unit paying below market rate is money left on the table." "This is triple what I'm paying now." "Actually, it's 3.02 times your current rate." Victoria smiled, actually smiled. "But don't worry, as family, we're giving you 60 days instead of the standard 30, Dad insisted. Olivia thought of Ruth Martinez in 3B, who'd lived here for 15 years. The Way family in 2A with their daughter learning piano. Old Mr. Miller, who tended the community garden behind the building. What about everyone else? Are you raising their rents too? "Market rate adjustments across the board." Victoria pulled out her phone, already moving on to her next task. "Those who can afford to stay will stay. Those who can't." She shrugged. "They'll be homeless," Olivia said, the reality sinking in. "They'll find housing within their means." Victoria looked up from her screen, and for a moment, Olivia saw something flicker in her eyes, annoyance, disdain. "This is the real world, Olivia. Grandma coddled you, letting you play property manager, keeping rents artificially low. But she's been gone 3 years now, and it's time to maximize the asset's potential." "Grandma cared about people." "Grandma was from a different era." Victoria stood smoothing her skirt. The vote was unanimous. Mom and Dad agree. It's what's best for the family's financial future. The words hit like a physical blow. Mom and Dad voted for this. They understand business. She moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and we'll need you to distribute the notices to all residents by end of week. As property manager, that's still your job for now. The threat in those last two words wasn't subtle. Victoria, please, Olivia pleaded. Can we talk about this? Maybe a smaller increase? There's nothing to discuss. Victoria turned back, and the smile on her face was the same one she'd worn when she'd beaten Olivia at Monopoly as kids, when she'd gotten into Yale, while Olivia was waitressing when she'd bought her brownstone while Olivia was still renting. It's just business, Olivia. Don't take it personally. The door clicked shut, leaving Olivia alone with the letter that would destroy everything she'd worked to maintain. She sank into her chair, staring at the numbers that seemed to grow larger the longer she looked at them. $7, $100 more than most of her residents made in a month. Olivia thought about calling her parents, but what was the point? They'd chosen their side, voted to support Victoria's plan without even telling her there was a meeting. The family had decided, and she wasn't really family. She was just the little sister who managed the building, whose below-market rent was a courtesy they could no longer afford to extend. Her phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. Notices need to go out by Friday. Template attached. Don't forget to include yours. That emoji, that damn smiling emoji, summed up everything. This wasn't just business to Victoria. She was enjoying this, enjoying putting Olivia in her place, enjoying the power she held. Olivia looked around her small office at the maintenance schedule she'd carefully organized, the birthday calendar where she tracked every resident's special day, the thank you cards pinned to her bulletin board from families she'd helped over the years. 6 years of her life, building a community, creating a home for people who needed one. And with a single vote, she wasn't even invited to participate in her own family, had decided to tear it all down. But as she sat there, something Grandma Eleanor used to say echoed in her mind. The truth has a way of surfacing, Olivia. Just like cream and coffee, you can stir all you want, but it always rises to the top. She pulled open her desk drawer looking for tissues, and her fingers brushed against something she'd forgotten was there, a small key on a faded blue ribbon. Grandma's safety deposit box key. She'd been meaning to go through her remaining papers, but had never found the time. Maybe now was exactly the right time. Standing up, she pocketed the key and looked once more at the rent increase letter. Victoria thought she'd won, thought she'd put Olivia in her place once and for all. Her parents thought they were making a smart business decision. But Grandma Eleanor had loved this building, had loved these people. She wouldn't have left things this simple, this cruel. She'd been too smart for that. As Olivia locked her office door heading for the bank, she couldn't shake the feeling that Grandma had one more surprise waiting, one that her family's unanimous vote hadn't accounted for. The game wasn't over. It had just begun. Olivia had barely made it back from the bank when she heard a soft knock on her apartment door. Still reeling from finding Grandma's safety deposit box empty, except for a cryptic note, "Look closer to home, dear one." She wasn't prepared for visitors. Ruth Martinez stood in her doorway, her 72-year-old frame wrapped in a hand-knitted cardigan she'd worn every day since her husband passed. She held a tea tray with 2 cups and a plate of her famous lemon cookies. "You look like you could use some chamomile, dear," she said, not waiting for an invitation before shuffling past Olivia into her living room. Ruth had been Grandma Eleanor's closest friend, their daily tea ritual as sacred as Sunday church. After Grandma passed, Ruth had tried to include Olivia in the tradition, but she'd always been too busy with building maintenance, too overwhelmed with grief. Today, she didn't have the energy to refuse. "I heard about the rent increases," Ruth said, settling into Olivia's armchair, as if she belonged there. "Mrs. Martinez is in tears. The Way family is already looking at listings in Tacoma." News travels fast. Olivia sank onto her couch, accepting the cup Ruth offered. The chamomile's honeyed scent reminded her painfully of Grandma's kitchen. "Your sister made quite an entrance this morning." Ruth's sharp eyes studied Olivia over her teacup. "Very professional, very efficient." That's one word for it. "I have other words, but Eleanor raised me better than that." She set down her cup with deliberate precision. Though I must say this whole business smells fishier than the docks at low tide. It's perfectly legal, Olivia said, the words bitter in her mouth. Property owners can raise rent to market rate. Victoria made sure to cite all the relevant statutes in her letter. Legal and right aren't the same thing. Ruth leaned forward. Your grandmother knew that. It's why she loved you so much. You understood that a building isn't just bricks and mortar. It's the lives inside it. Tears pricked Olivia's eyes. Well, apparently the rest of my family disagrees. They voted to maximize the asset's potential. She mimicked Victoria's clinical tone. Voted? Ruth's eyebrows climbed toward her silver hairline. When was this vote? Last weekend, apparently. A family investors meeting I wasn't invited to. Interesting. She pulled a small notebook from her cardigan pocket, the same kind Grandma used to carry. And who exactly attended this meeting? Victoria, my parents, Uncle Richard. Why? Ruth made a note, her handwriting still precise despite her age. I worked as a legal secretary for 40 years, dear, 30 of those at Hartwell and Associates dealing with property law. She looked up. In my experience, when family members hold secret meetings about inherited property, something's usually rotten. A chill ran down Olivia's spine. What are you saying? I'm saying your grandmother was the sharpest woman I knew. She played bridge like a chess master and ran this building like a Swiss watch. Ruth helped herself to a cookie. She also didn't trust your sister as far as she could throw her. Told me so herself right in this room 2 weeks before she died. Olivia's hand trembled, tea sloshing dangerously close to the cup's rim. She never said anything to me about not trusting Victoria. She didn't want to burden you. You were already doing so much keeping this place running while she was sick. Ruth's voice softened, but she was worried. Victoria had been asking questions about the building's value, about development potential, about zoning laws. Eleanor didn't like it. But Victoria barely visited when Grandma was alive. She visited plenty, just not when you were around. Always came during your Tuesday morning supply runs. Always left before you got back. The revelation hit like cold water. Why didn't you tell me before? What good would it have done? You were grieving, trying to keep everything together. She patted Olivia's hand. But now with this rent business, I think it's time we did some digging. Digging? Your grandmother kept files on everything. Receipts from 1987 tax returns going back decades. She was meticulous. Ruth stood with surprising agility. If something's off about this whole situation, there will be a paper trail. Olivia thought about the empty safety deposit box, the cryptic note. I've been going through her things. Not in the bank, dear. Here. Ruth tapped her foot on Olivia's floor. Eleanor had a horror of safety deposit boxes after the S&L crisis. Kept her important papers close. Olivia's heart skipped. Where? That's what we need to figure out. Ruth moved toward the door, then turned back. Start with her apartment. I know Victoria had it cleaned out, but Eleanor was clever. She would have hidden anything important where your sister wouldn't think to look. Victoria had professional estate cleaners go through everything. There's nothing left. Did they check inside the radiator covers, behind the electrical panels, under the floorboard in the closet that always creaked? Ruth smiled at Olivia's shocked expression. Eleanor and I shared many secrets over our tea, including where she kept her emergency chocolate stash. After Ruth left, Olivia sat in her apartment, mind spinning. The building felt different now. Not just her workplace and home, but a puzzle Grandma had left behind. Look closer to home, her note had said. She grabbed her master keys and headed to the basement storage area. Grandma's unit was in the far corner, supposedly empty after Victoria's efficient cleaning. The metal door creaked open, revealing bare concrete walls and dusty shelves. But Ruth was right. Grandma had been clever. She started with the obvious places, running her hands along shelf brackets, checking for loose screws or hidden panels. Nothing. Then she remembered something: Grandma's obsession with her old Singer sewing machine, the one she'd insisted on keeping in storage despite never using it. Victoria thought it was junk, Olivia muttered, spotting the machine in the corner covered by a dusty tarp. The machine itself yielded nothing, but as she moved it, she noticed the floor beneath it sounded different, hollow. Her pulse quickened as she found the edges of a carefully cut square in the concrete painted to match perfectly. Inside the hidden compartment was a fireproof box. Her hands shook as she opened it, revealing neat folders labeled in Grandma's precise handwriting. Bank statements, correspondence building documents, and one marked simply, "For Olivia when the time comes." She opened the correspondence folder first, and her blood ran cold. Email printouts between Victoria and various developers dating back 2 years before Grandma's death. Discussions about potential redevelopment, maximizing land value, and strategic rent increases to facilitate voluntary vacancy. One email from Victoria to a company called Apex Development made her stomach turn. "Once we have control, we can clear the building within 6 months. The old tenants won't fight if we make staying uncomfortable enough." But it was the folder marked for Olivia that held the biggest surprise. Inside was a letter in Grandma's handwriting. "My dear Olivia, if you're reading this, then Victoria has shown her hand. I've watched her circle this building like a vulture, and I knew she'd move once I was gone. But you, my dear, have something she doesn't. You understand that wealth isn't just about money. It's about community, about home, about taking care of each other. Check with Howard Davis." A phone number was written below, followed by more documents, legal papers with terms like LLC and beneficial ownership and trust structures. Olivia sat back on her heels in the dusty storage room, pieces of a larger picture starting to form. Victoria's rent increase wasn't just about market rates. It was the first move in a longer game, one she'd been planning for years. But Grandma had been playing a longer game still. She carefully returned everything to the box and took it back to her apartment. Tomorrow she'd call Howard Davis. Tonight she had notices to deliver, but not the ones Victoria expected. As she drafted a memo to her residents about an emergency building meeting, she thought about Ruth's words. Legal and right aren't the same thing. Grandma had taught her that too. She'd also taught her that in chess, the best defense was often a carefully planned counterattack. And thanks to her hidden files, Olivia finally had the pieces she needed to play. The morning she was supposed to distribute Victoria's rent increase notices, Olivia instead found herself sitting in a small cafe in southeast Seattle, watching rain streak down the windows. Across from her, Howard Davis looked nothing like the high-powered attorney she'd expected in his 70s, wearing a well-worn cardigan and nursing a cup of black coffee. He could have been any retiree enjoying a quiet morning until he started talking. "Your grandmother was one of the smartest clients I ever had," he said, pulling a thick folder from his briefcase. "Also one of the most suspicious. She came to me 3 years before she passed, convinced your sister was plotting something." 3 years? Olivia set down her untouched latte. "Right around when Victoria started visiting her during your supply runs." Howard's knowing smile reminded Olivia of Grandma's. "Eleanor noticed. She noticed everything." He opened the folder, revealing documents that made Olivia's head spin. "Your grandmother restructured the building's ownership in a very specific way. On paper, the family trust owns Willow Heights Apartments. That's what your sister sees what she's acting on. But ownership was actually transferred to an LLC called Summit Pine Holdings 3 years ago. The trust only manages the building. It doesn't own it." He slid a document across the table. "And Summit Pine Holdings has one sole owner." Olivia stared at the paperwork, her name printed clearly on the ownership documents. "I don't understand. I never signed anything. I would remember." "You did sign. Your grandmother had you sign what you thought were routine management papers. Page 47 of your employment contract update, to be specific." His eyes crinkled with amusement. Eleanor was very thorough. Every signature witnessed, every document notarized, every I dotted and T crossed. Olivia's mind reeled. "So I've owned this building for 3 years? Legally, yes. Your grandmother set it up so ownership would be invisible until someone tried to do exactly what your sister is doing, act outside the scope of property management." He pulled out another document. "Which brings us to this." The letter was addressed to Olivia, Grandma's handwriting still clear and strong. "Olivia, my darling girl, if Howard is showing you this, then your sister has finally made her move. I'm sorry for the deception, but I knew Victoria would never let you have the building if she knew the truth. She's too much like my brother Harold, sees everything in dollars and cents, never in hearts and souls. The building is yours legally and completely. Summit Pine Holdings was my final gift to you, named after the pine that grows on the building's east wall, the one you always said made it look like home. Victoria can raise rents as property manager, but she needs owner approval for any increase over 10%. She doesn't have it. More importantly, check the management agreement section 15.3.2. Victoria should have read the fine print. I've watched you pour your heart into Willow Heights for years. You know every resident's story, every leaky pipe, every dream and worry within those walls. That's why it's yours. Not because you're the best at business, but because you're the best at caring. Make me proud, sweetheart. And don't let your sister's fancy law degree intimidate you. Right is might, and you've got both. All my love. Grandma Eleanor P.S. Tell Ruth she was right about the storage room floor. That woman always was too clever for her own good. Tears blurred Olivia's vision as she looked up at Howard. Section 15.3.2. His grin widened. Automatic termination of management rights upon any attempt to raise rents more than 10% without documented owner approval. Your sister just fired herself. But she's a lawyer. How did she miss this? Arrogance mostly. She assumed the family trust owned everything outright, never bothered to check for encumbrances or alternative ownership structures. He sipped his coffee. Plus, Eleanor was clever. The LLC filing was done in Delaware, the paperwork buried in routine trust administration. Unless you knew exactly what to look for, you'd never find it. Olivia thought about Victoria's smug smile, her certainty that she'd won. What do I do now? That's up to you. You could confront her immediately, but… He leaned back. Your grandmother left one more piece of advice. Said if this day came, I should suggest you let Victoria dig her hole a little deeper first. Olivia frowned. What does that mean? Check your building's bank accounts. See if all the rent money is where it should be. Review the maintenance expenses. Your grandmother suspected Victoria might be skimming, but we never had proof. The implications hit Olivia like a punch. She's been stealing, allegedly, but if she has been, and if she continues thinking she's in charge… He shrugged. Well, embezzlement is a felony, and judges don't look kindly on lawyers who steal from family. Olivia spent the rest of the morning in Howard's office, reviewing documents, understanding the full scope of what Grandma had done. She'd thought of everything: backup documentation, clear chains of ownership, even a transition plan for when the truth came out. One more thing, Howard said as she prepared to leave. He handed her a sealed envelope. Eleanor said to give you this when you were ready. Said you'd know when that was. Olivia held the envelope, her name written across it in Grandma's familiar script. How do I know if I'm ready? I think, Howard said gently, the fact that you're asking means you are. She opened it in her car, rain drumming on the roof. Inside was a single photo, Grandma and Olivia at the building's entrance, taken the day she'd made her property manager. On the back she'd written, "The building was never about the bricks, sweetheart. It was about trust. I trust you. Now trust yourself." Ruth was waiting when Olivia got back to Willow Heights, practically vibrating with curiosity. Well, what did you find? Olivia looked at Ruth, then at the building. Her building, she realized with a shock. Through the lobby windows, she could see Mr. Miller teaching the way children to play chess, Mrs. Martinez knitting in her favorite corner. Her residence, her responsibility, her family of choice. I found out Grandma was even smarter than we thought, she said finally, and that Victoria is about to learn a very expensive lesson about reading the fine print. So what's our next move? Ruth asked, eyes gleaming with an anticipation that made her look decades younger. Olivia thought about Victoria's rent notices still sitting on her desk, about the residents waiting anxiously to know their fate, about the developers circling like sharks. Then she thought about Grandma's trust, Howard's advice, and the bank statements she needed to review. Now, she said, squaring her shoulders, we start documenting everything, every conversation, every transaction, every single thing Victoria does from this moment forward. And then we wait. Olivia smiled, feeling Grandma's strategic mind working through her. We let her think she's won. We let her get comfortable. And when she's shown everyone exactly who she really is, we show her the door. Ruth finished grinning wickedly. As they walked into the building together, Olivia felt the weight of responsibility, but also the warmth of purpose. Grandma had given her more than a building. She'd given her the tools to protect it, the wisdom to use them wisely, and the reminder that sometimes the best revenge isn't immediate. Sometimes it's justice served at exactly the right temperature. The chess game Grandma had started 3 years ago was entering its final phase, and thanks to her brilliant forward thinking, Olivia held all the pieces that mattered. The bank manager's face went pale as she scrolled through the account records on her screen. Olivia sat across from her in the small office at First National, her stomach churning as the manager turned the monitor toward her. Ruth sat beside her, her hand gripping Olivia's under the desk. $92,000, Olivia whispered, staring at the systematic withdrawals over the past 2 years. She stole $92,000. Each transaction was carefully crafted maintenance expenses, emergency repairs, vendor payments. But Howard had taught her what to look for, and Ruth's 40 years of legal secretary experience helped them spot the patterns. The same vendor names appearing monthly, the round numbers that real repairs never came to the signatures, that didn't match their actual maintenance crew's paperwork. The building's emergency fund is completely drained, the manager confirmed. And these transfers to personal accounts, can you trace where the money went? Ruth asked, her voice sharp. We'll need a formal investigation, but preliminary review shows transfers to an account under Victoria Taylor's name and several credit card payments. She printed out the statements, stamping them with the bank's official seal. I'll need to file a suspicious activity report. Outside the bank, Olivia had to sit on a bench, overwhelmed by the betrayal. Ruth rubbed her back as she processed what they'd discovered. She was stealing while Grandma was dying, Olivia said, voice cracking. While I was taking care of the building, thinking we were all working together, she was robbing us blind. And now she wants to raise rents to cover her tracks, Ruth said grimly. Force out the long-term residents who might ask questions, bring in new ones who don't know the building's history. Olivia's phone buzzed a text from Victoria. Did you distribute the notices? I need confirmation by 5:00 p.m. She stared at the message, rage building in her chest. Then she typed back, meeting with residents tonight. We'll update after. What are you planning? Ruth asked. Howard said to let her dig the hole deeper. Olivia stood, newfound determination straightening her spine. So let's give her a shovel. That evening, Olivia called a resident meeting in the community room. Every unit was represented. Families clutching the rent increase notices she'd finally distributed. Elderly residents looking frightened. Young couples calculating desperately on their phones. I know you're all worried, Olivia began, standing at the front of the room. The rent increases are shocking, and I want you to know I'm doing everything I can to fight this. How can you fight? Mr. Miller spoke out. Your sister owns building now. No. Olivia chose her words carefully. The ownership structure is complicated. What I can tell you is that no one should make any decisions about moving yet. I'm working with legal counsel to review our options. Legal counsel. Mrs. Martinez looked hopeful. You think there's a chance? I think Grandma Eleanor wouldn't have wanted this. Olivia met eyes around the room. And I think she was too smart to leave us unprotected. The meeting continued for another hour. Residents sharing their fears, their anger, their memories of Grandma. Olivia took notes, recorded everything with their permission, building the case Howard said they'd need. As people filed out, the Way family approached her. Miss Olivia, Mrs. Way said softly. We found an apartment in Tacoma, but we wait. Yes, you really think you can stop this? Olivia thought about the ownership documents in her safe, about Victoria's embezzlement, about the careful trap Grandma had laid. I know I can. Trust me a little longer. After everyone left, she found Ruth still sitting in the community room, going through her notebook. I've been tracking things, she said. Every time Victoria visited the building, every interaction with residents, every complaint we've received. Did you know she's been having her lawyer friends send threatening letters to anyone who's been late on rent? What? Olivia grabbed the letters Ruth showed her. These are horrible. Mrs. Chen was 2 days late because her Social Security check was delayed, and they threatened eviction. Building a paper trail of problem tenants, Ruth said disgustedly, making it easier to force them out. Later, Olivia's phone rang. Victoria. Olivia, I just got off a call with Apex Development, she said without preamble. They're very interested in the building, but they need us to be at 50% occupancy or less to make their offer. The rent increases are just phase one. Olivia hit record on her phone, gesturing for Ruth to stay quiet. Phase one. Once the bleeding hearts move out, we'll find code violations for the rest. Bed bugs are always effective. People flee from those, and you can't prove where they came from. She laughed. By summer, we'll have a clear building and an 8-figure offer. 8 figures? Olivia kept her voice neutral, playing dumb. At least this location is gold for luxury condos. Daddy's already looking at retirement properties in Scottsdale with his share. And the current residents? Not our problem. Victoria's voice hardened. You need to stop coddling them, Olivia. This is business. Either you're with the family on this or you're against us. I'm just trying to understand the plan. The plan is simple. We maximize value, we sell, we move on. Grandma held us back for decades with her ridiculous sentimentality. She's gone now, and it's time to act like the landlords we are, not social workers. Right. Olivia swallowed her anger. I'll work on the residents. Good. And Olivia, remember your below-market rent was conditional on your cooperation. I'd hate to have to evict my own sister. She hung up, and Olivia looked at Ruth. Did you hear that? Every disgusting word. Ruth was practically vibrating with fury. She just confessed to planning to fabricate bedbug infestations. That's fraud, dear. Olivia saved the recording, emailing it immediately to Howard with a backup to her personal cloud storage. Then she sat back thinking about the envelope Howard had given her grandma's final piece of advice. She opened it again, rereading the short note inside. When she threatens family, she's shown her true colors. Time to show yours. What do you think that means? Ruth asked, reading over her shoulder. Olivia thought about Victoria's words. Your below-market rent was conditional on your cooperation. The threat to evict her own sister, if she didn't help her destroy their residents' lives. It means Grandma knew exactly who Victoria was, Olivia said slowly. And she knew that eventually Victoria would threaten to destroy me too if I didn't fall in line. So what do we do? Olivia stood, feeling something shift inside her. The scared little sister was gone, replaced by the woman Grandma had trained her to be protector of this building and its people. We document everything. We build an airtight case. And then, she smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. We show everyone exactly what Victoria Taylor is willing to do for money, including betraying her own family. Ruth grinned back, looking like the legal secretary who'd helped take down corrupt lawyers for 40 years. Now you're talking like Eleanor's granddaughter. As they locked up the community room, Olivia looked at the building's walls, solid, dependable sheltering. Grandma had trusted her with more than property. She'd trusted her with homes, with lives, with the very concept of community, in a world that increasingly valued only profit. Victoria thought she held all the cards. She had no idea the game had changed completely. And Olivia was done playing by her rules. The next 2 weeks became a masterclass in strategic patience. While Victoria believed Olivia was cowing residents into submission, Ruth and Olivia were building something else entirely, an unshakable foundation of evidence. Their command center was Ruth's apartment, her dining table disappearing under color-coded folders, bank statements, and printed emails. They worked like detectives, or perhaps more accurately, like Grandma Eleanor would have worked methodically, carefully, with purpose. Look at this, Ruth said one evening, pointing to a spreadsheet she'd created. Every maintenance expense Victoria approved in the last 2 years. See the pattern? Olivia leaned over her shoulder, studying the numbers. They're all just under 10,000. Odd, right? The threshold requiring board approval. She kept everything below the limit where Mom and Dad would have to sign off. Ruth highlighted row after row. And look at the vendor names. Evergreen Maintenance, Blue Ridge Repair Summit Services. They all sound legitimate. And they're all incorporated in Delaware, all at the same registered agent address, all formed within days of each other. Ruth pulled up her browser. And none of them have any web presence reviews or employee records. They're shell companies. Olivia's phone buzzed, another text from Victoria. She'd been checking in daily, pressuring her about resident compliance. This time, she'd sent a photo from a Miami beach celebrating the future. Can't wait to close the Apex deal. Thanks for handling the difficult conversations, sis. Olivia showed Ruth the message. She snorted. Celebrating with stolen money. Document that location services show she's at the Ritz-Carlton. Their rooms are $800 a night. They photographed everything, creating both digital and physical copies. Howard had emphasized the importance of redundancy. Assume someone will try to destroy evidence, he'd warned, because they will. The residents, meanwhile, were holding strong. Word had spread through the building that Olivia was fighting for them, and they'd responded with their own form of resistance. Mrs. Martinez organized a phone tree. The Way family started a building newsletter documenting memories of Grandma Eleanor. Mr. Miller began teaching free chess lessons to any child in the building, creating a sense of community Victoria couldn't price out. "We're not just numbers on her spreadsheet," Mrs. Martinez told Olivia fiercely. "We're neighbors. We're family." It was Mr. Miller who provided their next breakthrough. He knocked on Olivia's door one morning, holding a manila envelope. "I am remembering something," he said in his careful English. "Your grandmother, she asked me to keep this. Said someday you might need. I forget after she died, but cleaning closet today, I find." Inside were photographs Victoria entering the building at various times, all date-stamped during Olivia's Tuesday supply runs. But more importantly, there were photos of her with a man Olivia didn't recognize, the two of them reviewing documents in the lobby. "Who is this?" she asked. "Marcus Wolf," Mr. Miller said, "from Apex Development. They meet many times before your grandmother died. Always when you gone." Olivia's blood chilled. Victoria had been planning this before Grandma was even gone. Ruth immediately began cross-referencing the dates with Grandma's medical records. "Olivia," she said slowly, "these meetings, they coincide with your grandmother's bad days. Days when she was on heavy pain medication. Victoria was meeting with developers while Grandma was suffering upstairs. Worse." Ruth's voice was grim. "Look at the signature on the preliminary agreement with Apex. It's dated 2 weeks before Eleanor died." Olivia stared at what was clearly meant to be Grandma's signature, but wasn't. She forged it, or got it when Eleanor wasn't lucid. Either way, Ruth trailed off, but they both knew the implications. This went beyond embezzlement. This was elder abuse fraud conspiracy. That night, Olivia called Howard. "We need to move soon. Victoria's getting impatient, and I'm worried she'll escalate." "Do you have enough evidence?" Olivia looked around Ruth's apartment at their war room of documentation. "We have proof of embezzlement fraud conspiracy with Apex forged signatures and recorded admissions of planning to fabricate code violations." "Is that enough?" Howard chuckled. "Eleanor would be so proud." "Yes, that's more than enough. But there's one more thing. We need a public forum where Victoria can't control the narrative." "What kind of forum?" "Patience. I'm arranging something. Keep documenting and be ready to move when I give the signal." 2 days later, Victoria escalated exactly as Olivia had feared. She showed up with 3 men in suits, lawyers from her firm. "We're conducting unit inspections," she announced in the lobby loud enough for everyone to hear, "looking for lease violations, unauthorized occupants, any health code issues." "You need to give 24-hour notice for inspections," Olivia said calmly. "Not for suspected health hazards." Victoria smiled that sharp smile. "We've had reports of pest activity." "From whom?" "Anonymous complaints, very serious ones." She gestured to her lawyers. "My colleagues will be documenting everything. I suggest you tell your residents to cooperate fully." Olivia knew this was the manufactured crisis Victoria had threatened, but she played along. "Of course, though I should mention we just had our quarterly pest inspection last week. Clean bill of health." Victoria's smile flickered. "We'll see about that." The lawyers spent 4 hours going through units, photographing everything, clearly looking for any excuse to issue violations. But the residents were ready. Mrs. Martinez had organized a cleaning brigade the night before. Every unit was spotless. Every lease term followed to the letter. "Nothing," one lawyer reported to Victoria. "These are some of the cleanest units I've inspected." Victoria's face darkened. "Check again." "We've checked 3 times. There's nothing here that violates any codes or lease terms." She turned on Olivia. "What did you do?" "My job," Olivia said simply. "I manage a well-maintained building with responsible tenants, just like Grandma taught me." Victoria's composure finally cracked. "You think you're so clever, fine. We'll do this the hard way." She pulled out her phone. I'm calling an emergency board meeting, Mom, Dad, and Uncle Richard. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. We're voting on immediate management changes. Looking forward to it, Olivia said. Victoria stared at her, probably wondering why she wasn't panicking. You should be worried, Olivia. When the board votes you out, you'll have 30 days to vacate your apartment, below market rate or not. After she left with her legal entourage, Ruth emerged from her apartment where she'd been recording everything through her door's peephole. Did you get it all? Olivia asked. Every word, dear, including her admission that the pest reports were fake. Ruth grinned. She really doesn't learn, does she? Olivia thought about tomorrow's board meeting about the family that had chosen Victoria's money over her community. They thought they were gathering to remove her. They had no idea they were walking into Grandma Eleanor's final checkmate. No, she said, feeling remarkably calm. She doesn't, but she's about to. Olivia spent that night gathering every piece of evidence, every document, every recording. Howard had said to wait for his signal, and she trusted him the way Grandma had. Tomorrow, her family would learn who really owned Willow Heights Apartments, and Victoria would discover that sometimes the little sister you've underestimated your whole life is exactly the opponent you should have feared most. The building was quiet as she finally went to bed, but she could feel it like the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for justice. Grandma, she thought, looking at her photo on the nightstand, I hope I make you proud tomorrow. Somehow, she knew she would. The doorbell rang at 8:00 a.m., 6 hours before the board meeting that was supposed to seal Olivia's fate. She opened it to find her parents standing there, her mother clutching her purse like armor, her father avoiding eye contact. We need to talk, Mom said, pushing past Olivia into her apartment. This has gone too far, Olivia. A dad followed, looking around her modest living room with an expression she couldn't read. They'd rarely visited since Grandma died, too busy with their retirement plans, their golf club memberships, their new life funded by Victoria's success. Would you like coffee? Olivia offered, playing the dutiful daughter one last time. This isn't a social visit. Mom settled onto Olivia's couch like a judge preparing to pass sentence. Victoria called us last night. She says you're being obstructive, turning the residents against her, sabotaging the sale. I'm protecting our residents, Mom, families who've lived here for decades. They're not our residents, Dad interrupted, finally meeting her eyes. They're tenants, and it's time you understood the difference. The words stung more than she expected. Grandma understood the difference. She chose to care anyway. Your grandmother was from a different time, Mom said dismissively. She let emotion cloud her business judgment. We won't make the same mistake. Emotion! Olivia felt her carefully maintained calm beginning to crack. Is that what you call treating people with dignity? We call it being practical, Dad said. Victoria has shown us the numbers. This building is worth $12 million as luxury condos. That's $3 million for you, Olivia. Enough to set you up for life. I don't want the money. Then you're a fool. Mom's words were sharp, final. Just like your grandmother clinging to old-fashioned ideas while the world moves on. Olivia studied her parents, these people who'd raised her, who taught her to share and be kind and help others. When did they become these cold strangers who saw dollar signs instead of human beings? What happened to you? She asked quietly. When did you become people who would throw families onto the street for money? When we realized we'd spent our whole lives being poor while others got rich, Dad said bitterly. Your grandmother had $1 million asset and let people live in it for peanuts. We won't make that mistake. Those peanuts kept roofs over heads, food on tables, children in schools. Not our problem. Mom echoed Victoria's words from weeks ago. Olivia, you need to decide which side you're on, your family or strangers. The residents aren't strangers. They're nothing to us. Mom cut her off. You have until the meeting to decide. Support Victoria's plan or we'll vote you out as property manager. And yes, that means you'll lose your apartment too. Below market rent is for family who acts like family. They stood to leave, but Olivia couldn't let them go without trying one more time. What if I told you Victoria's been stealing, that she's been embezzling from the building for years? Mom laughed, actually laughed. Victoria makes more in a month than you make in a year. Why would she need to steal? Greed, Mom, pure greed. You're pathetic, she said, and the contempt in her voice broke something inside Olivia. Making up lies about your successful sister because you're jealous. We raised you better than this. No, Olivia said quietly. Grandma raised me better than this. You just happened to be there. Mom's face flushed. You ungrateful little… I think you should leave, Olivia said, opening her door. I'll see you at the meeting. With your resignation letter, I hope, Dad said as they left. It's the only sensible move you have left. After they were gone, Olivia sank onto her couch, shaking. Ruth appeared moments later. She had an uncanny ability to know when Olivia needed support. I heard raised voices, she said gently, sitting beside her. Your parents. They're choosing money over everything Grandma believed in, Olivia whispered. They actually laughed when I mentioned Victoria's theft. Because they don't want to believe it. It's easier to paint you as the jealous failure than admit their golden child is a criminal. Ruth patted her hand. But the truth has a way of coming out, especially in board meetings. Olivia's phone buzzed a text from Howard. Change of plans. Can you get everyone to the community room at 1:30 before the board meeting? She showed Ruth the message. What do you think he's planning? Something Eleanor would approve of, she said with a knowing smile. That man never did anything without 3 backup plans. They spent the next hours preparing, making copies of crucial documents, organizing evidence in a presentation that even her parents couldn't dismiss. At 1:00 p.m., Olivia sent a building-wide message. Important meeting in community room at 1:30. Your future here depends on it. By 1:25, the room was packed. Every resident was there, from the young families to the elderly, all facing an uncertain future. The anxiety in the room was palpable. At exactly 1:30, Howard walked in. But he wasn't alone. A court reporter followed him, setting up equipment, and behind them came 3 people Olivia didn't recognize, all carrying official-looking briefcases. Ladies and gentlemen, Howard announced, I'm Howard Davis, attorney for the true owner of Willow Heights Apartments. We're here to inform you that despite what you've been told, your homes are safe. A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. Olivia stood up. Howard, what's happening? He smiled. What's happening is transparency. These are representatives from the state attorney's office, the Department of Consumer Protection, and the Real Estate Commission. They're very interested in what's been happening at Willow Heights. The door burst open. Victoria stood there, face flushed with anger, their parents and Uncle Richard behind her. What is this? The board meeting is in my office. No, Howard said calmly. The board meeting is wherever the owner decides to hold it, and the owner has decided on the community room. I'm the managing partner of the family trust, Victoria sputtered. I decide. You're the former managing partner, Olivia said, standing up. As of 1:27 p.m., when you attempted to raise rents over 10% without owner approval, triggering the automatic termination clause in Section 15.3.2 of the management agreement. Howard finished. Victoria's face went white. What are you talking about? The family trust owns the building. No, Olivia said, pulling out the ownership documents. I do. Summit Pine Holdings LLC sole proprietor Olivia Taylor has been for 3 years. The room erupted. Residents gasped. Her parents stared in shock, and Victoria looked like she'd been punched. That's impossible, she said. I would have known. You would have if you'd done proper due diligence instead of assuming you knew everything. Howard opened his briefcase. But that's not the only reason we're here today. The state attorney representative stepped forward. Ms. Victoria Taylor, we've received credible evidence of embezzlement, fraud, and elder abuse. We'll need you to come with us for questioning. This is ridiculous. Victoria backed toward the door. You can't prove anything. Actually, Olivia said, pulling up her phone. I can. She played the recording of Victoria admitting to planning fake bedbug infestations, to meeting with Apex Development, to forcing out residents. The room listened in horrified silence as Victoria's own words condemned her. Additionally, Ruth stood up, holding her meticulously organized folders. We have documented evidence of $92,000 in fraudulent withdrawals shell companies created to siphon building funds and forge signatures on contracts with developers while Mrs. Eleanor Taylor was on her deathbed. The government officials moved toward Victoria, who looked desperately at their parents. "Mom, Dad, tell them this is a mistake." But their parents were staring at the evidence being displayed, the color draining from their faces, as they realized their golden child was exactly what Olivia had tried to tell them, a thief and a fraud. "Victoria," Mom whispered, "is this true?" "I was trying to maximize value," Victoria shouted. "For all of us, Olivia doesn't understand business. Olivia understands that business without ethics is just theft with extra steps," Howard said. "Your grandmother knew that. It's why she made sure Olivia would be here to stop you." As the officials led Victoria away, she turned to look at Olivia one last time. "You ruined everything." "No," Olivia said quietly. "You ruined everything the day you decided money mattered more than people. I just made sure you couldn't hurt anyone else." The room was silent after she left, everyone processing what they'd witnessed. Then Mr. Miller started clapping slowly. Mrs. Martinez joined him, then the Way family, and soon the entire room was applauding. Her parents stood frozen by the door, looking lost. For a moment, Olivia felt sorry for them. Their retirement dreams funded by Victoria's success were crumbling before their eyes. "Olivia," Dad said hoarsely. We didn't know." "You didn't want to know," Olivia corrected gently. "It was easier to believe I was jealous than to believe she was corrupt." They left without another word, shoulders slumped with the weight of their choices. Uncle Richard slunk out behind them, probably calculating how much of his investment in Victoria's schemes he'd lost. Howard waited until the room settled before speaking again. "Now then, as the owner's attorney, I'm authorized to announce that all rent increase notices are hereby rescinded. Rents will remain at current levels with only cost of living adjustments as outlined in your original leases." The cheer that went up could probably be heard 3 blocks away. 3 weeks after Victoria's arrest, Olivia stepped into the private conference room at the Hilton downtown, her heart pounding against her ribs. This family meeting her mother had called felt like walking into an ambush. The neutral ground her mother had chosen was anything but neutral. The entire extended Taylor family filled the elegant conference room, cousins she hadn't seen in years. Aunts and uncles who'd always favored Victoria, distant relatives, who'd shown up for what promised to be family drama of the highest order. Their faces displayed a mix of curiosity, judgment, and barely concealed hostility. Victoria sat at the head of the table as if she still owned the room. Out on bail, she wore her sharpest charcoal suit, hair perfectly styled makeup, concealing the strain of recent weeks. She'd clearly been working the crowd before Olivia arrived. Beside her sat a shark in Italian leather, Marcus Steinberg, her high-profile defense attorney known for getting wealthy clients acquitted of white-collar crimes. "Finally," Mom said, as Olivia entered with Howard, "we can begin." Olivia took the only empty seat directly across from Victoria, the symbolism lost on no one. This was a confrontation, and they were placing the sisters face to face. "We're here," Mom announced with practiced formality, "to discuss the future of Willow Heights Apartments and the damage done to this family's reputation." "The only damage," Aunt Patricia interjected, glaring at Olivia, "was caused by Olivia's vindictive persecution of her own sister." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Olivia's stomach tightened. They'd already chosen their narrative. She was the jealous younger sister who destroyed the successful one out of spite. "Olivia has torn this family apart." Uncle Richard added, his voice sharp with accusation. "Over what? A building full of low-income renters. She could have had millions." "Those low-income renters are human beings," Olivia said quietly, meeting his gaze. "With families, jobs, lives that matter." "More than your own family," Cousin Derek sneered, the same cousin who'd never hesitated to remind Olivia of Victoria's accomplishments at every family gathering. "You had Victoria arrested your own sister." "I reported evidence of embezzlement and fraud to the proper authorities," Olivia corrected, keeping her voice level. "The state arrested her based on that evidence." "Alleged evidence," Steinberg interjected smoothly, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of a courtroom veteran. "My client maintains her innocence and looks forward to clearing her name in court." Victoria leaned forward, and Olivia saw it again, that smile that had haunted her childhood, the one Victoria wore when she knew she was winning at Monopoly, when she'd gotten her acceptance letter to Yale, while Olivia was working double shifts at a cafe to pay community college tuition. "I've made a generous offer," Victoria said, sliding a document across the table. "Despite everything, I'm willing to buy Olivia out. 20 million for the building. That's 5 million more than market value. All she has to do is sign." The room buzzed with excitement. $20 million more money than any of them had ever dreamed of possessing. "Think of what you could do with that money, Olivia," Mom urged, her eyes shining with a mixture of greed and what she likely thought was maternal concern. "You could go back to school, travel, never worry about money again." "And the residents?" Olivia asked, already knowing the answer. "What happens to them?" Victoria shrugged, the gesture dismissive. "Not our problem once the sale goes through." "There it is," Olivia said, looking around the room at the faces of her blood relatives. In one sentence, everything wrong with this family's values. Not our problem. Olivia stood, pulling out her laptop. "You want to talk about damage to this family's reputation? Let me show you what real damage looks like." Howard helped her connect to the room's projection system. The first slide appeared, Grandma Eleanor's photo taken on her 70th birthday, her eyes bright and determined despite the cancer that had already begun its silent work. "This is the woman who built our family's legacy," Olivia began, her voice gathering strength. "She bought Willow Heights in 1976 with every penny she'd saved, not as an investment, but as a mission. She'd been evicted 3 times as a child during the Depression. She knew what it meant to lose your home." She clicked to the next slide, photos of longtime residents. "Mrs. Martinez has lived here for 22 years. She raised 3 children in apartment 3C, all of whom graduated college. Mr. Miller fled the Soviet Union with nothing but the clothes on his back. Willow Heights was his first real home in America. The Way family started their American dream in a place that welcomed them when no one else would." "So stories don't pay bills," Uncle Richard muttered, though he avoided her eyes. "No, but apparently embezzlement does." Olivia clicked again, displaying the forensic accounting report. $92,000 stolen over 2 years. Shell companies forged signatures, all while our grandmother was dying. "Alleged," Steinberg protested, though with less conviction than before. "Documented," Olivia countered, showing bank records, every transaction traced, every false vendor identified. But that's not the worst part. The next slide showed email exchanges between Victoria and Apex Development. These emails date back 3 years. While Grandma was suffering from cancer, while I was caring for her in the building, Victoria was secretly negotiating to sell to developers. Olivia clicked through email after email, each more damning than the last. The room grew quieter with each revelation. Several family members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "The old bat can't last much longer." Olivia read from one email, her voice steady despite the pain the words caused. "Once she's gone, we can move forward with the full redevelopment plan." Gasps echoed through the room. Even Victoria's most ardent supporters looked uncomfortable. Aunt Patricia, who had been so quick to condemn Olivia, now stared at her hands, unable to meet anyone's eyes. "That's taken out of context," Victoria said, but her voice had lost its earlier confidence. "Then let's add context." Olivia played the audio recording of Victoria admitting to planning fake bedbug infestations, to forcing out families, to seeing residents as obstacles to profit. When Victoria's recorded voice said, "They're not our problem," Olivia saw her mother flinch visibly, as if the words had physically struck her. "But the real context," Olivia continued, "is this." She showed the video Howard had revealed at the resident meeting, Grandma Eleanor's final message. The room watched in stunned silence as Grandma, frail but fierce, looked directly into the camera. "If you're watching this, it means Victoria has shown her true colors. I've known for some time that she sees Willow Heights as nothing but dollar signs. That's why I've taken steps to protect it. Olivia, my darling, you understand what I've spent my life building. It's not about the property. It's about the promise. The promise that everyone deserves a safe, affordable home. That community matters more than profit. That we take care of each other." Eleanor's image paused, her eyes seeming to look directly at each person in the room. "To my family watching this, I know you'll be angry. I know you'll feel cheated out of money you think you deserve. But ask yourselves, What legacy do you want to leave? Do you want to be remembered as the family who got rich by making others homeless, or the family who stood for something more? The video ended. The silence in the room was deafening. Olivia could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning, the muted traffic sounds from outside, the controlled breathing of people confronting uncomfortable truths. She was sick, Victoria said desperately, not thinking clearly. Her medical records show she was completely lucid when this was recorded. Howard interjected, his voice gentle but firm. As 3 doctors have already testified. This is what you're protecting, Uncle Richard accused, turning on Olivia, though, with less conviction than before. This bleeding heart nonsense that keeps us all poor. Poor? Olivia laughed, but there was no humor in it. You drive a BMW. You vacation in Europe twice a year. You own 3 rental properties. You're not poor, Uncle Richard. You're just not as rich as you think you deserve to be. And what's wrong with wanting more? Aunt Patricia demanded, though she couldn't meet Olivia's eyes. Nothing, unless more comes at the cost of destroying lives. Olivia looked around the room, meeting each family member's gaze in turn. Grandma built something beautiful, a place where refugees could find safety, where single mothers could afford to raise their children, where elderly people could age with dignity. And you want to tear it down for condos that will sit empty half the year, owned by foreign investors who use them as tax shelters. You're being dramatic, Mom said, but her voice wavered, her certainty cracking. Am I? Olivia pulled up local news articles showing encampments beneath overpasses, families sleeping in cars, children clutching worn backpacks as they changed schools for the 3rd time in a year because their parents couldn't find stable housing. This is what happens when buildings like ours get redeveloped, she said quietly. This isn't dramatic. This is reality for thousands of people in Seattle right now. She turned to Victoria. This is your legacy. This is what you want the Taylor name associated with. The Taylor name should be associated with success. Victoria shot back, her composure slipping. With wealth and power. And embezzlement, Olivia interrupted. Because that's what the headlines say now. Prominent lawyer charged with stealing from family property. Elder abuse alleged in real estate scheme. Is that the reputation you wanted? Victoria's lawyer whispered urgently in her ear, but she shook him off, her face flushed with anger. You did this. You destroyed my career, my reputation, everything. No, Victoria. You did that the moment you decided stealing was easier than earning. Olivia closed her laptop with a quiet finality. I'm not selling, not to you, not to developers, not to anyone who sees homes as just investments. Then you're a fool, Victoria spat. And when you're old and still managing that decrepit building, remember you could have had millions. I'll remember that I kept families in their homes, that I honored Grandma's legacy, that I chose people over profit. Olivia stood to leave. And I'll sleep perfectly well. This isn't over, Victoria called after her. The trial hasn't even started. I'll beat these charges. And when you do, Olivia turned back, you'll still be someone who tried to make families homeless for money. No verdict can change that. Olivia walked toward the door, Howard beside her, but her mother's voice stopped her. Olivia, wait. She turned to see tears on her mother's face, the first genuine emotion she'd displayed in years. The carefully maintained facade of the society wife had cracked, revealing something vulnerable beneath. I remember when Mother bought Willow Heights, she said softly. I was 12. She was so proud. Said it was proof that in America, even someone like her could make a difference. She did make a difference, Mom. To hundreds of lives. I know, her mother's voice broke. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that mattered. Your father and I got so caught up in appearances, in having the right address, belonging to the right clubs. Victoria seemed to understand that world better than you ever did. The admission clearly cost her. But once started, the words tumbled out like water breaking through a dam. We pushed her to succeed, to be the best. Maybe we pushed too hard. Olivia crossed back to her, taking her mother's trembling hands. It's not too late to remember what Grandma taught us. The room erupted in arguments, some family members defending Victoria, others beginning to question what they'd supported. But Olivia didn't stay to hear it. She'd said what she needed to say, shown what they needed to see. As Howard and Olivia waited for the elevator, he chuckled softly. Eleanor would have enjoyed that. You played it perfectly. I just told the truth. Sometimes, he said, pressing the down button. That's the most powerful play of all. As they rode down, Olivia thought about Victoria's parting shot. This isn't over. She was right. The criminal trial was coming. Victoria would fight with everything she had, with every expensive legal maneuver Steinberg could devise. But Olivia had something Victoria didn't. A building full of people who mattered, a grandmother's wisdom guiding her, and the knowledge that she was on the right side. The war wasn't over, but this battle was hers. The courthouse buzzed with activity on the first day of Victoria's trial. What might have been a routine embezzlement case had captured public attention, becoming a symbol of Seattle's housing crisis and wealth inequality. The confrontation between the two sisters, one, a powerful attorney, the other a property manager fighting for affordable housing, created a narrative that resonated far beyond the Taylor family. Olivia sat in the gallery between Ruth and Howard, hands clasped tightly in her lap to stop them from shaking. Across the aisle, her parents occupied the front row behind Victoria. Their presence as a show of support still stung, though her mother had called twice since the family meeting, her voice tentative, almost apologetic. They'd chosen their side even after everything they'd learned, and now they would witness the consequences of that choice. Victoria projected calm confidence at the defendant's table. Marcus Steinberg leaned close, whispering last-minute strategy as they waited for proceedings to begin. She'd pleaded not guilty to all charges: embezzlement, fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy, maintaining her innocence in press statements that portrayed her as the victim of a jealous sister's vendetta. All rise, the bailiff announced. The Honorable Judge Patricia Hernandez presiding. Judge Hernandez, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, took her seat surveying the packed courtroom with practiced neutrality. We're here for the matter of State versus Victoria Taylor. Is the prosecution ready? We are, Your Honor. Assistant District Attorney James Wright stood younger than Olivia had expected, but with a quiet authority in his bearing. Defense ready, Your Honor, Steinberg responded, adjusting his gold cufflinks. Mr. Wright, your opening statement. The prosecutor approached the jury box, making eye contact with each juror as he began. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about betrayal. Betrayal of family trust, betrayal of fiduciary duty, and most critically, betrayal of an elderly woman who was dying of cancer while the defendant plotted to steal her life's work. Wright outlined the evidence methodically: the shell companies, the forged signatures, the missing $92,000. With each point, Olivia watched the jurors' faces, noting how they leaned forward slightly, their expressions growing more serious. The defense will try to paint this as a family dispute, Wright continued, gesturing toward Steinberg. They'll say Ms. Olivia Taylor is a jealous sister, that this is about inheritance and hurt feelings. But the evidence will show something far darker, a calculated scheme to defraud not just a building, but the vulnerable residents who called it home. Steinberg's opening was exactly what Wright had predicted, delivered with the smooth confidence of a man who charged $850 an hour. This is indeed a family dispute, he began, his voice tinged with practiced sympathy. A tragic misunderstanding between sisters, complicated by grief and conflicting visions for a family property. My client, Victoria Taylor, is a respected attorney with an impeccable record. She's being persecuted by a sister who resented her success and manipulated their dying grandmother into cutting the family out of their rightful inheritance. Ruth's hand found Olivia's, squeezing gently as Steinberg continued. We'll show that every action Ms. Taylor took was within her legal rights as the appointed manager of the family trust, that what the prosecution calls embezzlement was actually legitimate business expenses, that Olivia Taylor, motivated by spite, has orchestrated this entire prosecution to destroy her sister's career. The testimony began with the forensic accountant, a woman with steel-rimmed glasses and meticulous notes, who walked the jury through Victoria's financial shell game with devastating precision. These vendor companies, Evergreen Maintenance, Blue Ridge Repair, Summit Services, they all share the same Delaware registration address, she explained, pointing to highlighted sections of her report. None have employees' equipment or any history of actual work performed. And where did the money go? Wright asked. To accounts controlled by the defendant. We traced $92,000 in payments to these shell companies, all of which ended up funding personal expenses, vacations, luxury goods, credit card payments. Steinberg tried to shake her on cross-examination, suggesting the expenses were legitimate business entertainment, that the companies were real contractors with outsourced work. But the accountant held firm, producing documentation that demolished each claim with scientific detachment. The second day brought the property records expert who examined the documents allegedly signed by Eleanor Taylor. This signature purportedly Eleanor Taylor's authorization for preliminary sales agreements with Apex Development was made 2 weeks before her death, when hospital records show she was heavily sedated and physically unable to write. Objection, Steinberg called. The witness isn't a medical expert. I'm not testifying to her medical condition, the expert clarified calmly. I'm testifying that the handwriting analysis shows clear signs of forgery, inconsistent pressure letter formations that don't match authenticated samples, and most tellingly, the signature was written with a Mont Blanc pen that records show the defendant purchased 3 days before this document was signed. The third day was perhaps the hardest for Olivia to endure. The prosecution played her recordings of Victoria, her sister's voice filling the courtroom as she admitted to planning fake bedbug infestations, her callous dismissal of residents' lives, her meetings with developers while Grandma was dying upstairs. They're not our problem once the sale goes through. Olivia couldn't help glancing at her parents during this testimony. Her mother's face had gone pale, one hand pressed against her mouth. Her father stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched tight, unable or unwilling to look at either daughter. Then came Olivia's turn to testify. State your name for the record, Wright began after she was sworn in. Olivia Elizabeth Taylor. What was your relationship with Eleanor Taylor? She was my grandmother, Olivia said, her voice steady despite the emotions swelling in her chest. But more than that, she was my mentor, my example of how to live with purpose. Wright guided her through the timeline, discovering the rent increases, finding the hidden documents, uncovering the embezzlement. Olivia focused on facts rather than emotions, honoring Howard's advice to let the evidence speak for itself. Why didn't you immediately confront your sister when you discovered you owned the building? On the advice of counsel, we wanted to document the full extent of the fraud first. Also, she paused, choosing her words carefully. I hoped I was wrong. I hoped there was an explanation that didn't involve my sister stealing from our dying grandmother. And was there such an explanation? No. The evidence only pointed to one conclusion: Victoria had been systematically defrauding the building while planning to sell it to developers against Grandma's express wishes. Steinberg's cross-examination was brutal, designed to portray Olivia as jealous, vindictive, manipulative. Isn't it true you've always resented your sister's success? I've never resented Victoria's legitimate success, Olivia replied, maintaining eye contact. I resented her treating our grandmother's legacy as a piggy bank. You lived in that building at below market rent for years, didn't you? I did, in exchange for managing the property, maintaining it, and being on call 24/7 for emergencies. While your sister worked 60-hour weeks building her career. While my sister apparently worked those hours planning to steal from our family business. Yes, he tried angle after angle, painting Olivia as lazy, entitled, manipulative. But she had truth on her side, and truth has a way of standing firm against even the most expensive legal attacks. You secretly inherited a $12 million building and didn't tell your family for 3 years. Doesn't that make you the deceptive one? I didn't know I'd inherited it until after Victoria tried to destroy the lives of dozens of families, Olivia said, her voice strengthening. My grandmother structured the ownership that way to protect those families from exactly what Victoria attempted. On the fourth day, the residents testified. Mrs. Martinez spoke about raising her children at Willow Heights, about the community Grandma had built. Mr. Miller described fleeing persecution, finding safety in apartment 2B. The Way family talked about starting their American dream in a place that welcomed them. The defendant saw us as obstacles to profit, Mrs. Martinez said, tears in her eyes as she clutched a handkerchief. But Mrs. Eleanor saw us as people, as family. Steinberg tried to dismiss them as biased, suggesting they were motivated by self-interest in keeping their below-market rents. But their dignity and evident honesty resonated with the jury, whose sympathetic glances weren't lost on Victoria. The most dramatic moment came when Victoria took the stand in her own defense. Steinberg tried to paint her as a dedicated daughter, trying to maximize value for her family. But Wright's cross-examination was surgical. "You met with Apex Development while your grandmother was dying." "I was exploring options for the family's future." Victoria answered, her composure still intact. "Yes or no? Did you meet with developers while your grandmother was in hospice care?" "Yes, but did you tell her about these meetings?" Victoria hesitated. She wasn't in a condition to understand complex business. "So that's a no. Did you tell your sister who was caring for your grandmother daily?" Olivia wouldn't have understood. Another no. "Did you create shell companies to build the building for work that was never performed?" Those were legitimate vendors. Wright produced the evidence again, piece by damning piece. With each question, Victoria's composed facade cracked a little more, revealing glimpses of the entitlement and contempt that had driven her actions. "Ms. Taylor, in this recorded conversation, you said you planned to make staying uncomfortable enough that residents would leave voluntarily." "What did you mean?" "I was speaking hypothetically about bedbugs." "That's your hypothesis?" Wright asked, not bothering to hide his incredulity. The jury's expressions reflected similar skepticism. Victoria's attempts to explain only deepened the hole she dug. In closing arguments, Wright was devastating, his quiet intensity more effective than theatrical flourishes. "The defendant wants you to believe this is about family jealousy, but embezzlement isn't a family dispute. Fraud isn't a sibling rivalry. Elder abuse isn't a difference of opinion. These are crimes, and the evidence proves beyond reasonable doubt that Victoria Taylor committed them." Steinberg made one last attempt, arguing that Victoria had acted within the law as she understood it, that any irregularities were honest mistakes, that sending her to prison would destroy a promising career over what amounted to aggressive business practices. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Hernandez asked as they filed back into the courtroom. "We have, Your Honor," the forewoman replied, her voice steady. "On the charge of embezzlement in the first degree, how do you find her guilty? On the charge of fraud, guilty. On the charge of elder abuse, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy, guilty." With each guilty, Olivia watched Victoria shrink in her chair, the reality of her situation finally penetrating the armor of entitlement she'd worn for so long. The composed, confident sister who'd smirked while tripling Olivia's rent was gone. In her place sat someone forced to face the consequences of her choices. Their mother sobbed quietly. Their father's face was stone, his eyes fixed straight ahead. They'd backed the wrong daughter, and now everyone knew it. Judge Hernandez scheduled sentencing for the following month. As court officers prepared to take Victoria into custody, her bail revoked after the guilty verdict, she turned to look at Olivia across the courtroom. For a brief moment, Olivia saw her sister not the predator she'd become, but the girl who'd taught her to ride a bike, who'd snuck her cookies when Mom said no. Then that moment passed, and Victoria's face hardened into something unrecognizable. "I hope you're happy," she said, voice carrying in the suddenly quiet courtroom. "I'm not," Olivia replied honestly, "but I am relieved that you can't hurt anyone else." As they led Victoria away, Olivia stood on shaking legs. Ruth hugged her. Howard patted her shoulder. The residents who'd come to support her offered quiet congratulations. But there was no joy in winning, only the sad satisfaction of knowing she'd done what was necessary to protect the people who depended on her. Justice had been served, but it tasted like ashes. The morning of Victoria's sentencing arrived gray and drizzling, the Seattle sky matching Olivia's mood. She dressed carefully in the navy suit Grandma had bought her for her college graduation. "Every woman needs one perfect suit," Eleanor had told her, "something that makes you feel powerful when you put it on." Today seemed like the right time to wear it. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters. The case had transcended family drama to become a symbol of the city's housing crisis, with editorial writers using phrases like greed versus community and the human cost of gentrification. Olivia kept her head down, letting Howard guide her through the mob of cameras and microphones. Inside the gallery was packed again, but this time she noticed new faces: other property managers, tenant advocates, even city council members. What had started as a family dispute had become something larger, a focal point for broader conversations about housing community and values. Her parents sat in their usual spot, looking older than she'd ever seen them. In the months since the verdict, her mother had called several times, each conversation a little longer, a little less guarded. Her father had even visited the building once, awkwardly complimenting the community garden Mr. Miller had expanded. Small steps, tentative attempts at reconciliation that might never fully heal the breach Victoria had created. Victoria entered in custody wearing county jail orange instead of her designer suits. The months since her conviction had worn on her visibly. Her face was thinner, her perfect posture slightly slumped, her eyes shadowed with sleeplessness. But when their gazes met briefly across the courtroom, Olivia still saw defiance there, the refusal to admit she might have been wrong. "All rise," the bailiff called, and Judge Hernandez took her seat. "We're here for sentencing in the matter of State versus Victoria Taylor. I've reviewed the pre-sentencing report, the victim impact statements, and the arguments from both sides." She looked at Victoria. "Ms. Taylor, would you like to make a statement before I pronounce sentence?" Victoria stood Steinberg beside her. "Yes, Your Honor." She unfolded a piece of paper with hands that trembled slightly, the only outward sign of her inner tension. "I want to start by saying that I maintain my innocence. I believe I acted within my rights as property manager and in the best interests of my family's financial future." A murmur ran through the gallery. Even now, facing years in prison, Victoria couldn't bring herself to admit what she'd done. "However," she continued, her voice steadying, "I acknowledge that my actions caused pain to the residents of Willow Heights Apartments. That was never my intention. I was raised to believe that success meant maximizing profit. That sentiment had no place in business. I see now that this philosophy has cost me everything: my career, my freedom, and my family." She turned to look at Olivia directly. "Olivia, I know you think you've won, but what have you really accomplished? You're still managing a rundown building for people who will never appreciate your sacrifice. You'll never have the life you could have had. And for what? So strangers can have cheap rent." "That's enough, Ms. Taylor," Judge Hernandez interrupted, her tone sharp. "This is meant to be a statement of remorse, not a continuation of your trial arguments." Victoria folded her paper. "I'm finished, Your Honor." "Very well. The court has received numerous victim impact statements, but I understand Ms. Olivia Taylor wishes to address the court directly." Olivia hadn't planned to speak, but standing there seeing Victoria still unrepentant, she knew she had to. "Yes, Your Honor." She approached the podium, her prepared statement suddenly feeling inadequate. So she spoke from the heart instead. "Your Honor, people keep asking me if I'm happy my sister is going to prison. I'm not. This isn't about happiness, it's about protection. Victoria stole money, yes, but she tried to steal something far more valuable: the homes and dignity of dozens of families." She turned to face Victoria. "You ask what I've accomplished. I've kept Mrs. Martinez in the apartment where she raised her children. I've ensured Mr. Miller can grow old in the home he found after fleeing persecution. I've protected the Way family's American dream. That's not nothing, Victoria. That's everything." Her voice grew stronger, steadier. "You say they'll never appreciate my sacrifice, but you're wrong. Every birthday card from a resident, every child who runs to hug me in the hallway, every thank you from a family that can afford groceries because their rent is reasonable. That's appreciation worth more than any luxury condo development." She looked at Judge Hernandez, whose attention remained focused and respectful. "Your Honor, my grandmother used to say that we're measured not by what we accumulate, but by what we preserve for others." Victoria tried to destroy what Grandma preserved. She violated the trust of a dying woman who loved her, stole from families who could least afford it, and even now shows no real remorse. "I ask that the court consider not just the financial crimes, but the human cost of her actions." As she returned to her seat, Ruth squeezed her hand. "Eleanor would be so proud," she whispered. Judge Hernandez reviewed her notes before speaking, her expression thoughtful but unreadable. "Ms. Taylor, you were convicted of embezzlement, fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy. The pre-sentencing report shows a pattern of deliberate, calculating behavior spanning years. You abused your position of trust, stole from vulnerable residents, and exploited your grandmother's illness for personal gain." She paused, her stern gaze fixed on Victoria. What troubles this court most is your complete lack of genuine remorse. Even now you frame your crimes as business decisions, as if that somehow mitigates the harm you've caused. You've shown no understanding of the human impact of your actions. The sentencing guidelines suggest 8 to 12 years. The prosecution has asked for the maximum. The defense requests leniency based on your lack of prior record and professional accomplishments. Olivia's heart pounded as Judge Hernandez continued, her words measured and deliberate. However, this court must consider the egregious nature of these crimes. You're an attorney, Ms. Taylor. You knew the law and chose to break it. You used your legal knowledge not to help others, but to construct elaborate schemes to defraud. You betrayed your profession, your family, and most importantly, the vulnerable residents who depended on stable housing. She lifted her gavel. Therefore, this court sentences you to 10 years in state prison, with possibility of parole after 7. You're ordered to pay full restitution of $92,000 to Willow Heights Apartments. Upon release, you'll be permanently disbarred from practicing law. You'll serve 5 years probation following your incarceration. The gavel came down with finality. Victoria swayed on her feet, Steinberg steadying her with a hand at her elbow. 10 years, a decade of her life gone, though, with good behavior, she might serve only 7. This court is adjourned. As officers prepared to lead Victoria away, their mother suddenly stood. "Wait, please. Can I speak to my daughter?" Judge Hernandez nodded, and the officers allowed Mom to approach. Olivia watched as her mother reached for Victoria, who stood stiff and unresponsive, rejecting the comfort offered. "I'm sorry," Mom sobbed, her carefully maintained public persona crumbling completely. "We failed you. We taught you that money mattered more than people. And now," Victoria said coldly, "you're paying for believing me. You all wanted me to be successful, to make you proud, to make us rich. I did what you raised me to do." "No." Dad spoke for the first time, his voice broke in tears streaming unchecked down his face. "We raised you wrong. Olivia." He looked at her across the courtroom. "Learned the right lessons despite us. From Eleanor, we should have listened to her." Victoria laughed bitterly. "Too late for should-haves, Dad. Hope you enjoy spending my commissary money for the next 10 years. The officers led her away, her orange jumpsuit disappearing through the courtroom doors. Their parents stood frozen, watching their golden child vanish into the prison system, the full weight of their choices written in their slumped shoulders and tear-streaked faces. Outside, the rain had stopped, the clouds beginning to break. Reporters swarmed again, but this time, Olivia paused on the courthouse steps, Howard at her side. "Ms. Taylor, how do you feel about the sentence?" someone shouted. She considered her answer carefully. "I feel grateful that justice was served, but mostly I feel sad. Sad that greed destroyed my family. Sad that it took criminal prosecution to stop my sister from making dozens of families homeless. And sad that she still doesn't understand why what she did was wrong." "What's next for Willow Heights Apartments?" another reporter asked. "What's always been next?" Olivia replied. "We continue being a community. We maintain affordable housing in a city that desperately needs it. We prove that Grandma Eleanor was right, that taking care of each other matters more than maximizing profit." "Will you reconcile with your parents?" Olivia glanced back to see them emerging from the courthouse, looking lost and broken. The proud socialites reduced to ordinary people grappling with painful truths. "That's up to them," she said softly. "They need to decide what kind of people they want to be. My door is open when they figure that out." Back at Willow Heights, the residents had organized a gathering in the community room. Not a celebration, they all understood this wasn't a happy ending, but a moment of closure, of affirmation that their community would endure. "To Eleanor Taylor." Mr. Miller raised his coffee mug, his accent still thick after decades in America, "who saw the future and protected us all." "To Olivia, Mrs." Martinez added, her warm brown eyes shining with emotion. "Who had the courage to do what was right even when it cost her everything." "It didn't cost me everything," Olivia said, looking around at these faces that had become more than neighbors. "It showed me what I really had all along. Family isn't just blood. It's the people who stand with you, who trust you, who make a community worth protecting." Ruth pulled out a photo Grandma and Olivia taken the day she'd secretly made her the owner. She knew, didn't she? Ruth asked. Knew this day would come. She knew Victoria, Olivia said, tracing her grandmother's smiling face with one finger. And she knew me. Most importantly, she knew what mattered. 6 months after Victoria's sentencing, Olivia stood in the courthouse lobby again, but this time for a very different reason. The manila envelope in her hands contained the deed transfer papers. She was officially placing Willow Heights Apartments into a community land trust, ensuring it would remain affordable housing forever, regardless of market pressures or future development. Howard stood beside her along with Ruth and a dozen residents who'd come to witness this moment. Even her parents were there sitting quietly in the back, their presence a tentative step in a reconciliation process that had begun with awkward phone calls and grown into cautious Sunday dinners where they listened more than they spoke. "You sure about this?" Howard asked one last time, his expression serious. "You're essentially giving up millions in potential wealth." "I'm sure," Olivia said, signing her name with Grandma's own fountain pen. "Wealth isn't just about money. Grandma taught me that." The news had broken that morning. Property manager gives away $12 million building to ensure affordable housing, and reporters were already gathering outside. But this wasn't about headlines. It was about fulfilling a promise, about honoring a legacy that valued people over profit. As they emerged from the courthouse, the afternoon sun breaking through Seattle's typical clouds, Olivia saw a familiar figure across the street. Marcus Wolf from Apex Development stood there, his phone pressed to his ear, no doubt calculating if there was still some angle to exploit. When he caught her eye, she simply smiled and shook her head. He turned and walked away, finally, understanding that Willow Heights was never going to be his. Back at the building, they held a ceremony in the community room. The new trust board, comprised of residents, community advocates, and housing experts, officially took responsibility for Willow Heights' future. Olivia would stay on as property manager, but now she worked for the community, directly answerable to the people whose homes she protected. "Speech, speech," Mr. Miller called out, and others joined in, their voices filling the room with warmth and expectation. Olivia stood at the front of the room, looking at all these faces that had become family in the truest sense of the word. 3 years ago, when Grandma was dying, she told me something I didn't understand at the time. She said, "Olivia, buildings are just brick and mortar, but homes are made of trust. I trust you to know the difference." She paused, seeing nods of understanding around the room. "Today, we've ensured that Willow Heights will always be homes, not just housing. That future residents will find the same welcome that Mr. Miller found when he arrived from Russia, that the Martinez family found when they needed a place to start over, that the Way family found when they needed it most. But this isn't just about preserving the past. It's about securing the future. The trust will maintain affordable rents while ensuring proper maintenance and improvements. No one will get rich off Willow Heights, but everyone will have a chance at a stable home." Mrs. Martinez wiped tears from her eyes. "What would Eleanor say if she could see this?" "She'd probably say it's about time," Ruth interjected, making everyone laugh. "And then she'd remind us all that the real work is just beginning." She was right. The trust structure meant constant vigilance, community involvement, and careful management. But it also meant security, no future Victoria could swoop in and destroy what they'd built. Later that evening, Olivia found herself alone in her office, sorting through the day's mail. Among the usual bills and maintenance requests was a letter with familiar handwriting. Her breath caught as she recognized Victoria's precise script. She almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity won. "Olivia," it read, "I heard about the trust. You gave away $12 million. Even now I can't understand why. But I've had 6 months to think in here, and maybe that's the point. Maybe I'll never understand, because we see the world through completely different lenses. I still believe I was acting in the family's best interest. I still think you're a fool. But I'm beginning to realize that my definition of best interest might have been flawed. Mom writes me about the building, about the residents, about you. She seems different now, softer. She volunteers at the food bank and talks about Grandma constantly. I think losing everything finally taught her what actually mattered. I have 9.5 years left to think about that less if the parole board is sympathetic. I won't ask for forgiveness. We both know I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I'm starting to understand why Grandma chose you. Not because you were the better person, though clearly you were, but because you could see what I was blind to, that home means more than equity. Don't write back. I'm not ready for that. Maybe I never will be. V. Olivia sat with the letter for a long time, then filed it away without responding. Maybe someday Victoria would truly understand what she'd tried to destroy. Maybe not. Either way, Willow Heights was safe. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. The Way's youngest daughter, Lily, peeked in her shy smile, lighting up the room. "Miss Olivia, Mama wanted me to give you this." She handed Olivia a card handmade with construction paper and glitter. Inside, in careful children's handwriting, "Thank you for keeping our home safe. Love, Lily." This was wealth beyond measure. Olivia walked through the building that evening, checking locks and lights as always. In the community room, teenagers were doing homework together. In the courtyard, elderly residents shared tea and gossip. Through apartment windows, she saw families sharing dinner lives unfolding in the security of stable homes. On the building's east wall, the pine Grandma had loved still grew, now reaching the third floor. Olivia touched its needles, remembering Eleanor's words. "Strong roots, Olivia. Everything good comes from strong roots." Her phone buzzed a text from Howard. "Congratulations again. Eleanor would be over the moon. P.S. The Times wants to do a feature story. Interested." She thought about it, then typed back, "Only if they focus on the residents, not me. This was never about me." As she headed back to her apartment, she passed the plaque they'd installed that morning. "Willow Heights Apartments, established 1976 by Eleanor Taylor, preserved in perpetuity for the community. We make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give." 10 years from now, Victoria might be out of prison sooner with good behavior and a sympathetic parole board. But Willow Heights would still be here, still affordable, still home to families who needed it. The pine would have grown higher. The residents would have changed, but the mission would remain. Victoria had asked what Olivia had accomplished by choosing community over cash. The answer was all around her, in every maintained apartment, every child playing safely in the courtyard, every elderly resident aging in place with dignity. She'd accomplished exactly what Grandma had envisioned. She'd proven that greed didn't always win, that communities could fight back, that sometimes the little sister who everyone underestimated could change the game entirely. Victoria had tried to raise her rent from $2,350 to $7,100. She'd smirked as their parents called it fair. She'd thought she held all the cards. But Grandma had taught Olivia that in the end, the house doesn't always win. Sometimes the home does. And that's not just a victory. That's a legacy worth preserving.